Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to this holiday edition of the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, May 25th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Thanks for making the Federal Drive part of your Memorial Day holiday. Today we're sharing some of our recent stories about military families and survivors. We'll hear from Sarah Roeder with helpful tips to help military families prepare for and survive the summer PCS cycle. And Jamie and Tracy Parent share their experience raising an autistic child while in the military. Those stories and much more ahead during this special Memorial Day edition of the Best of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. For more than a decade, Sarah Wilson has been a steady presence for military families navigating military grief, from good grief camps to crisis support in some of the hardest moments. Her peer-to-peer networks, advocacy work, and calm guidance have strengthened the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, or TAPS community, at home and abroad. She joined me ahead of receiving the Senator Ted Stevens Leadership Award earlier this year at the TAPS Honor Guard Gala. Sarah, it is so great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me here, Terry.
You are receiving a really important award, the 2026 Ted Stevens Award for Leadership from the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. That award is really born out of deep personal loss for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experience and how you came to TAPS, what it's meant to you?
Thank you, Terry. Yes. So I'm Sarah Wilson. I live in Washington, D.C. here, and I'm a military widow, been a member of the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors since 2014, when my late husband died suddenly and unexpectedly. And my children were ages 2 and 6 at the time. And I really felt very much alone in that I didn't have other peers who were going through that same experience. It's pretty unusual to lose your husband that young. And so to me, over the past 12 years, being part of TAPS, being part of this community of hope and healing, where we can share with each other our lessons learned, we can help each other integrate our loss into our lives, and be ready to move forward with helping others to go through that same experience.
The TAP leaders say you embody the peer support model that's at the heart of the organization. What does that look like when you're trying to create space for, as you just said, kind of honest grief and connection in your day-to-day work with surviving families?
Yeah, it's the peer model. I've never been more impressed with the peer model than I have been going through these past 12 years of grieving my husband and helping others grieve their loss. There's something to be said for walking in the same shoes as someone else. And one of the things we say at TAPS is that grief rewrites your address book. So I have wonderful friends, wonderful family, very supportive, but nothing could match the experience I would have when I talked to a fellow widow who also had young children when their spouse died. And likewise, I'm not a mother of a deceased service member, but I know that's the way throughout all of our communities at TAPS, whether it's widow or parent or fiance, partner, battle buddy, friend, neighbor, all of that, we can find someone to help companion you through your loss. And that's been incredibly powerful for me.
You mentioned that your children were 6 and 2 when they lost their dad. And one of the key programs at TAPS is their good grief camps. Yeah. Tell us about the impact that had on your children.
It was huge. So my husband died in February of 2014, and 3 months later, I found myself at the TAPS National Seminar, Military Survivor Seminar. We have it every Memorial Day. I'm from New Jersey, so Memorial Day used to be going down the shore. And since 2014, it's been going to Arlington and being with 1,000 of my fellow survivors. And for my children, it was huge. So my baby was too young to go to grief camp, but when he was able to, then he started. My 6-year-old hadn't really spoken my husband's name, we were all just very much in shock. And after a good grief camp where she was able to have other kindergartners be with her and talk to her about how they were feeling, and she could share how she was feeling, and all of it in a very safe environment, paired one-on-one with military mentors. After that grief camp, she started talking about her feelings more. She would say daddy, she would talk about my husband. And over the years, she's actually going into her last year of good grief camp this year. She graduates. We have a huge graduation ceremony. And over those years, she has then turned her own experience of sharing her feelings to encouraging other children who come in as, you know, as she's going through the different groups, the age groups, she's been able to share her own experience and help encourage them to share their feelings. And it's been huge. She's also been part of some international groups where we have, you know, from Ukraine. Bonnie's been active with TAPS in Ukraine. And so it's not just with American children, but it's learning from others as well in other cultures on how we can express our feelings, how we can integrate our loss into our lives. And for children, I mean, it's just critical.
I'm speaking with Sarah Wilson. She's a military widow, and she's the 2026 recipient of the Senator Ted Stevens Leadership Award from the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Sarah, one of the features in the award nomination that I read was a remark about your advocacy on Capitol Hill and how that has shaped policy conversations and really some pretty significant legislative activity. What drives you to bring survivor voices into those rooms, and what do you hope lawmakers hear when you speak on behalf of these families?
So I credit TAPS with forming a very robust advocacy program that features us coming onto Capitol Hill from all 50 states, District of Columbia, from all over the country, to share with lawmakers about what our loved ones' sacrifices has meant. You know, we're in a post-draft world, and so 2 million people are serving in the military right now, active duty and reserve, out of 342 million people in this country. Our loved ones have earned benefits that they may not be familiar with, that they may be jeopardizing by not supporting certain legislation, or that they may not be even aware of. And so it's important for us to share our voices so that not only for ourselves, but also for everyone coming behind us, that they don't have to fight on top of everything else, on top of the grieving and everything else.
You stepped into some pretty difficult situations, including supporting families after the tragic shooting of 2 National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. How do you approach those moments when families really are facing their darkest hours?
I think the most important thing that I've learned from TAPS is just to be willing to sit with people in that moment. So I express who I am, what I've been through. If they want to ask me questions about my experience, that I'm there to share with that, but just to be with them. And especially in those initial moments of shock, to be able to be there to give them the basic elements that we need in life, comfort, in some cases food, or, you know, making things easier for them. But just to be willing to sit there with no judgment and just to hear them and be with them. Sometimes that means more than saying words.
Well, we've got 7 new families who are mourning the loss of service members who've been killed in our recent operations in the Middle East. What do you want them to know about TAPS and the resources that are available to them now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mourn for all of those families, and all of us in the TAPS community do. I want to make sure those families know TAPS is here for them 24/7, whether it's going to be tomorrow, whether you're not ready for a year, whether you're not ready for 10 years. We will always be here. We are a family, and I would encourage them to reach out to us at taps.org, taps.org. We have an 800 number, 1-800-959-TAPS. 24/7, someone, not an AI, not an answering machine, someone picks up that phone and listens to whatever it is that's on your mind. I would really encourage, especially if the families have just, you know, children, and every member in the family is welcome at TAPS. If you're grieving the loss of a military loved one, TAPS is there for you.
And as you prepare to receive this award tonight, and you think back on your journey from grieving widow to national advocate, how does that resonate with you? What's next for you?
I don't know what's next for me, but I love that I have an inflection point here to think about just how much I've gone gone through, but also how much I've processed, how much I've integrated, how much I've learned. And, I've got two thriving children, which I never would have thought I would had when my husband died out of the blue. That to me means as much, if not, if not more than the award. I'm grateful for the award. I think it could have been given to a million other of us at TAPS. We're a group of doers, so I'm very honored to be receiving the award tonight. But I have to say, I feel very grateful for the experience I've had with my fellow TAPS members who've encouraged me and who've given me so much.
I've been speaking with Sarah Wilson. She's a military widow, and she's the 2026 recipient of the Senator Ted Stevens Leadership Award from the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Sarah, thanks so much for joining me today, for sharing your story with us, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's been my pleasure.
You can find this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, a military family's decades-long journey with autism is now helping other families navigate a system that often feels impossible to manage. Do you want to recognize a federal employee or military service member for their critical work in supporting the country? Send them an e-card today. Visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search May We Say Thank You. You're listening to the best of the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technologies shaping how agencies modernize secure operations and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search Innovation in Government.
Welcome back to this special Memorial Day edition of the Best of the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. For military families, navigating autism care often means navigating multiple systems at once. Jamie and Tracy Parent have spent more than 30 years raising an autistic child while moving through diagnoses, deployments, school changes, and the maze of military and civilian support programs. Their new book, The Mission at Home, turns that lived experience into practical guidance for families facing the same transitions and gaps in care. I talked with Jamie and Tracy about what they've learned and what still needs to change. Jamie and Tracy, it's so nice to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us, Terry.
Jamie, you all have got a new book out that shares a very personal family story about your son Brian's autism diagnosis back in 1988 and how that has shaped your family's experience since then. When you look back at those early years, what stands out most for you about how your family learned to navigate autism within the realities of military life, which is challenging on its own?
Well, back in 1988, when Brian was diagnosed at age 2, there was very little information, public or clinical or educational information about autism. So we basically started at ground zero. And over the early years, while Brian was being diagnosed, we ran into a number of clinicians and educators that also didn't know anything about autism. So we had to learn a lot of grassroots things. We had to go to some little education resources we had. But the thing that really helped us the most was families like us. We found families that maybe had a 2-year-old, a 12-year-old, an adult perhaps living at home. And those families were really, really special and really influential in our lives. And Tracy and I made a pact. We said, you know what, when it comes time for us to give back, we're going to go back and we're going to help families the way families helped us. And that's probably the main reason for writing the book.
Tracy, let me ask you to follow up on that. How did you connect with other families who were experiencing the same situations, and what were the biggest challenges that you all found in common?
Well, the very first thing that happens is when you have to go and move, you have a quick deployment or you're being relocated, you kind of have to start over again. And I stress that the most important thing that helped me was connecting with other families. Finding those parent groups saved us. I mean, it really did, because you're very isolated and you feel alone. But when you get together with the military base, they have base spouses pages now. You can get on Facebook. but basically those local groups of people that understand exactly what you're going through, you do not feel so alone anymore. And I will tell you that you end up bonding with these families because they understand that you have both the mission for the military and you have the mission at home. In our book, we're kind of hoping that nobody has to navigate that mission of autism by themselves. So I really think that those resources are vital for any parent that's listening out there to get together with other parents or other groups that they have for you to feel that you are supported.
Jamie, you were the military member in this family. When a military family makes a PCS move, sometimes it's easiest for the active duty service member. You just got that job and you're just going to start it again. How did you support your family through this kind of perpetual move transition process?
Well, in the book, we go into things like how to manage assignments, how to manage promotions, how to manage your military career. And we emphasize that you can have a successful military career with an autism family, as I call it. So we wanted to emphasize in the book that those types of things shouldn't prohibit you from seeking a solid military career. What I was doing to help Tracy along the line was identifying some of the programs that could help us, like TRICARE, the Exceptional Family Member Program, the Extended Care Health Option, and also the Autism Care Demonstration Project, which added additional features like beyond healthcare, like durable medical equipment, respite care, and more importantly, the ability to access applied behavioral analysis, which has been a very successful tool in helping individuals with autism.
We'll come back to those programs in a minute, but Tracy, you were the one keeping the home fires burning and navigating all of this process. What do people who haven't had this kind of experience really miss about what you're going through?
Well, I will tell you that everyday life, it was like being a hamster on a hamster wheel. And that's why I was glad that Jamie did go forward and check out the base or check out the services before us, because you have to deal with those day-to-day issues. And that's why it's really important to bond with other people. I know we're saying it often, and go to the military EFMP offices, the Extended Family Member Program offices, to find out where those groups were, because I needed that support. And a lot of times I had to get it through a telephone call or a quick conversation, because you're busy every day with working with your child when they're younger. When they go to school, you get a little bit more time. Again, then going to school, local groups, that really helped. That started to give me some sense of oneness, that there was hope. And I think that's the biggest thing. And that there was life after autism, and that I could get out there and eventually get my career back, or see friends, and not be stuck doing everything myself. I think the biggest lesson I learned is that autism makes sure that you realize we are all interdependent and we all need each other. And it's not something you go alone. So with that support in place, then you can go on and you can create a life for yourself.
I'm speaking with Jamie and Tracy Parent. Jamie is a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. Tracy is a neurodiverse coach and speaker. Their new book is The Mission at Home. Jamie, let me come back to you. In your last answer, you rattled off a bunch of different programs, and I want to come back to those because listeners may not be aware of all of them. There are a lot of programs, both in the military and in schools and communities, that can help. But putting them all together really requires a roadmap. How does your book help families with that?
We have firsthand experiences with all of these things, and our book goes into depth about what the benefits are and how to achieve them. You're right, the military has come a long way with additional programs. These programs did not exist while we were on active duty, but now they do exist, and now they are greatly improved over time. Still a lot more work to do, but navigating those programs was kind of doing the same thing Tracy was talking about. I was looking for enlisted and officer personnel that had a child with autism, and say, hey, what happened to you? How did things work out? So it's a combination of that, I think, that helped me maneuver a successful military career. But I did need a lot of help from a lot of people to make those connections and to make things work.
As you think about the roadmap that you developed and the insights that you developed through the school of hard knocks, if you will. Thinking about where we are today, what do you want policymakers, either in the military or in Congress or even in local communities and governments, to think about to support families like yours?
I think the biggest thing that's happened and continues to work is the EFMP program is now under the control, let's say, of the line of the Air Force. It used to be under the medical side. But putting it to the line of Air Force, I think, helped improve a lot of visibility with Congress because it is a readiness issue now. There are a number of soldiers that can get deployed to a specific area, and there's still no services there. So we still have a pretty good framework, but getting more ties between the military community and the military base, I think would be something that senior leaders perhaps could take a harder look at, because it is a readiness issue. And like I tell people, if there's a soldier out there manning a post 3,000 miles away, he or she doesn't want to worry about little Johnny getting an appointment back home. So if we can alleviate that soldier's needs, then they can better perform their duties far away from home.
Tracy, what do you wish that schools had been better equipped with, or community support groups had been better equipped with to support your family?
Well, back in our time early on, it was very isolating. And what I saw that was needed, and I think a lot of places do, but a lot of places are still lacking, you really need to have a parent special ed group at schools. They need to have a voice in the school, and they need to have a voice in the programming that goes on for students with autism. In our book, we outline questions that you need to ask when you're going to a school to make sure that they have appropriate services. Teachers need to be trained. Teacher assistants need to be trained. There needs to be disability awareness so people understand, why is a child acting this way, what's going on. And I feel that when you do disability awareness and you teach people what's going on, they're a lot more understanding. I will tell you that Brian changed my career from a physical education to a special educator because I learned so much from other teachers, and I wanted to bring that forth. And I also realized that when I work with children and I explain things, they're very, very accepting. So a lot of times it's the red tape that gets in the way. And if we could get rid of that red tape and let the children deal with it, we have a lot better outcomes because they're a lot more accepting.
Well, speaking of learning from your own experience, Jamie, you've started a program called the Enabled Vet Program that helps disabled veterans gain skills and independence. How did that come about out of your life lessons with Brian?
I noticed there are a lot of veterans with a high unemployment rate, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 times the civilian rate, if you will. I saw a lot of veterans struggling to get jobs. And I saw schools and heard about grants and all of that. But a lot of times, the veteran needed a lot of coaching. How do I be successful in an interview? What do I wear? Do I put my phone down? You know, these simple things, because military members never really have to interview for very much. So I developed the program. It was a fast track program. And we didn't have classrooms. We didn't have books. What we had, though, was me and staff that were willing to work with veterans and give them skills very quickly. And one place I found that could do that was the hospital I was at Rush University Medical Center. So we would bring a cadre of veterans in, and we would teach them how to set up printers, how to set up networks, how to deploy computers, and using on-the-job training, strictly on-the-job training, the veterans were able to absorb this information. But I also knew that that was not enough. And I knew that coaching, additional coaching was needed to be successful in a job interview, because you can blow a job interview in 10 or 15 seconds. And the veterans needed to know what these cues are. So we would have contractors come in and help with the interview process with these individuals. And then the contractors were motivated because after the interview, if the candidate was right, they would hire them. And they would hire them quickly. And it wouldn't be 100% walking into the job, but we gave the veterans the tools they need to speak well in the healthcare IT space. And we had the partnership with the contractors who had their own individual needs in hiring people. And it just worked well for everybody involved.
Are there lessons there that you think could translate to supporting autistic military children as they move into adulthood?
Certainly. I mean, the education component is key. And the soft skills, I think, are very important to teach the children and make them more comfortable during a potential interview. We had a lot of interviews with Brian after military service because he needed a job. And so we practice. Mm-hmm. And then we practice again some more because the repetition is very helpful for people with autism. So, yeah, those are some of the lessons we learned about bringing folks along on the journey to the enabled vet.
Tracy?
I also think that the last thing that could be learned for both veterans and autistic children is if you have acceptance, you have patience, and you give the proper supports like the enabled vets did, or if schools would give the proper supports, children with autism not only succeed, but they thrive. And I feel the same way for our veterans.
One of the advantages that people don't realize is when you hire a military veteran, you feel good about it. I'm supporting the veterans. I'm supporting the war fighters, people that did so much for us. I feel good that I'm supporting these people. But after about 3 or 4 weeks, you realize that maybe the veterans are supporting you. The veterans bring a certain discipline to the job. It could be snowing or raining, and the military person will show up. So it was very good to have those kinds of things happening at the same time. And it was helpful to bring those folks along the way we did.
I've been speaking with Jamie and Tracy Parent. Jamie is a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. Tracy is a neurodiverse coach and speaker. Their new book is The Mission at Home. Thank you both for joining us and sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can find this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come on this holiday edition of the Federal Drive, veterans have seen this story before, and they're paying close attention to what comes next. But first, a PCS move can test a family's finances, routines, and support systems all at once. This is the best of the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to this special Memorial Day edition of the best of the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. PCS moves can put real strain on military families, from unexpected costs to the impact on careers and kids. Sarah Roeder, Director of Partnerships and Member Engagement at Armed Forces Mutual, joined me to explain where families can get caught off guard and what helps smooth the transition. Sarah, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry. It's really great to be here today.
You know, summer change of station moving is right around the corner for a lot of military families. From your perspective there at Armed Forces Mutual, what do you see as families begin to approach this? Why is this so challenging for so many of them?
As we call it, PCS season, like you said, is upon us. And for the military community, such as myself, I'm a military spouse. I have done several PCS moves. And it's so challenging for our community because we're moving every 2 to 4 years, right? So we're kind of constantly on the go. But a lot of it comes down to the financial aspects of moving. When you're having to move at a cadence like that, there are a lot of financial things that come into play. And so we see at Armed Forces Mutual, our families sometimes finding themselves in financial stress or feeling the financial burden of a PCS move. And like I said, you're doing this in the cadence of every 2 to 4 years. And so that adds up. That's a lot of dollars. And so that's one of the things that we see as a stressor when it comes to PCSing.
Moving that frequently is one way to make sure you don't accumulate a lot of stuff or fill up a basement. But as you say, it can present some financial challenges. The military does reimburse a lot of the costs associated with permanent change of station. But talk to us about some of those unreimbursable costs or non-reimbursed costs that do present families with additional financial challenge.
Yes. So I'll tell you myself, as a very new military spouse, I very naively thought that, well, the military is going to take care of everything, right? Everything that I need to move. And they do, like you said, take care of a lot of those expenses. But every time you move, there's always the unexpected. For myself, one of the things that I found that was a very unexpected thing was, and you don't realize, is when you're moving was the re-enrollment of everything. So if you have children and you're moving, you have to re-enroll them into sports, right? They play sports, they're active, you want to be a part of the community, re-enrolling into sports activities, buying new uniforms, right? Getting integrated into a school and buying new school supplies sometimes. Setting up a home, right? As we move, especially as military spouse, you want to set up your home and you want it to feel comfortable and nice. And so with that, you realize my couch that fit in my last home does not fit into my new space that I've just moved into. And so you're unexpectedly having to buy furniture to fit into new spaces. And so these are kind of the additional, I guess you could say, hidden costs sometimes that we don't realize that we will experience. And in understanding it, you can plan a little bit ahead of time and say, I need to have a buffer. I need to have a financial buffer so that when I move and I hit these unexpected things, it doesn't feel burdensome or more stressful. It's already a stressful time. Trying to alleviate some stress, this is a great way to do that. I'll tell you, even one time our goods were supposed to arrive at a certain, date and time, and they were a week late. And I didn't account for having an extra week's worth of clothes. And so it was finding, where do I wash these clothes? Or I need to go to Target and buy new clothes because we're out. And so these are just kind of all the little tiny things that happen as you go through these moves every 2 to 4 years, like our military families do.
I remember thinking about things like all of the condiments in your refrigerator that you have to throw away and replace.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was about mayonnaise.
Yeah, it can be as simple as mayonnaise. And these are the things that, if we can plan a little bit, right? As I became a more seasoned military spouse and realized, I need to have a financial buffer because I am going to have to replace the mayonnaise, right? And re-enroll in the schools and do all this stuff, was, planning ahead for that and making sure I had additional funds so that it didn't feel as stressful.
Sarah Roeder is Director of Partnerships and Member Engagement at Armed Forces Mutual. Sarah, you've said a couple of times that you're a military spouse. Let's talk about the impact of this move on the spouse themselves, trying to maintain a career through repeated moves. What actually helps as spouses navigate this transition?
Yeah. So I have done that, right? Looked for work and new duty stations and tried to, actively be a part of the workforce outside of my home. And there's a lot of challenges when it comes to being a military spouse and working outside of the home. I'll give you a quick little data point here. The Department of Labor says that it takes, on average, a military spouse 19 weeks to find work and secure employment after relocation. That's about 4 months, right? So that's 4 months of lost income. That's 4 months of time. So I think one of the biggest things that as a military spouse we can do is knowing that it's going to take us time and starting that process early. 4 to 6 months before a move. We live in such a digital world now with Teams and Zooms, and you can interview across the country for jobs. It's doing that ahead of time, really starting to look at the community you're going to be moving into and start your job hunt 4 to 6 months beforehand. One of the great resources I encourage every military spouse to check out is the Military Spouse Employment Partnership portal through the DoD, MSCP. It is a list of about 1,000 companies that say, we actively want to hire military spouses. We want to hire them. We realize that you're going to move. We realize that you're capable, wonderful workers, but you live a transient lifestyle across, the world, and that's okay. And so there are companies that when you initially are applying or looking for employment there, you don't have to be worried or scared to say you're a military spouse. You can be very proud of that. And you can search by, geographic location. And so I would say that's one of the biggest things as a military spouse is looking for employment well before your move to get a head start.
And Sarah, you also talked about the impact on kids. What helps smooth that transition into a new community and school when young children are involved in the move as well?
That's a hard one, right? Our kids are really resilient, and we know that, but we still have to support them and have a network. One of the things that I found that was a great resource in communities was the sports aspect. My boys love to play sports, and so that was a great way to tie immediately into a community and into a school system. But another one of those great touch points was Blue Star Families has something called Coffee Connects. You can look on their website and find where the Coffee Connect in your installation is. And it's a very casual setting at a coffee house locally where military spouses come. If they have really little kids who aren't in school, they bring them. If it happens to be on a weekend, you can bring all of the children. And it was a great resource to feel like the second you walked in, I didn't have to explain myself. Everyone was the same as me in a sense. We're all military spouses. We're all moving. We're all starting over, every 2 to 4 years, trying to get our footing. And it was a really nice way to meet other military spouses in the community and other families, right? And so we can be the connection point for our children to help them establish the play dates and meeting other friends and things like that. And so those were two really big things that I leaned on personally was the sports and then being a part of kind of Coffee Connects or community activities.
Last summer around this time, DOD was making a lot of changes to the moving contractors associated with military moves. There's always something happening in the PCS space. Where can military families get the latest info and how can they use that to best prepare for a move that they know is going to happen?
Yeah, so that's great. And like you said, the DOD has a great place, that you can go and look at that. But I'll be really honest. I think one of the most helpful things was looking to social media. Quite honestly, I think that when we look at certain Facebook groups or even in the Blue Star Families neighborhood within the community you're about to move, asking how other people's moves went, asking how did that in the last 2 weeks, right? How did your move actually go? Who was your provider that you were using? What did it look like? Were your goods delayed? Were they not? Did you get reimbursed? I think is a great way to really actually know kind of the boots on the ground, what's happening. Because I think a lot of times, right, we look to the guidelines of what should be happening. And a lot of times what should happen doesn't quite translate over. And so I personally want to hear from the individual that just went through it. And I want to know what was your experience? And then I can best prepare for that. So that's my recommendation. Those are the things that I leaned on as a military spouse. Anytime there was a change, a regulatory change or a change in anything, yes, I can look that up, but I want to hear from the people that are going through it, right? And so I found through social media, there's lots of avenues to do that. And Blue Star Families has Blue Star Family Neighborhood, which is kind of a secure site for military spouses to be able to go into and talk about these things. And that was a great resource.
I've been speaking with Sarah Roeder. She's Director of Partnerships and Member Engagement at Armed Forces Mutual. Sarah, thanks so much for this practical advice.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the time today.
You could find this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Up next, veterans have seen this story before, and they're paying close attention to what comes next. You're listening to the Best of the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to this special Memorial Day edition of the Best of the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. When GI Bill abuse surfaced years ago, veterans' benefits kept flowing to schools that met higher education standards but failed veterans themselves. Now, as accreditation standards are back under review, advocates say lessons from that era still haven't fully been applied. They're pushing to give Title 38, the Veterans Benefits Law, a clearer role in determining which schools qualify for GI Bill dollars. Will Hubbard, Vice President for Veterans and Military Policy at Veterans Education Success, joined me to explain how those changes could better protect veterans before harm occurs. Will, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I feel like this has got to be a deja vu moment for you at Veteran Education Success. Many veterans groups remember the headlines from almost a decade ago when GI Bill money was flowing to for-profit universities that later turned out to be low quality or deceptive. Is what you're seeing now in the marketplace reminiscent of those times 10 years ago?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, the answer is yes. There tends to be a bit of a cycle when it comes to these predatory operations, and there will be turnover with their leadership, and they'll disappear for a bit. Sometimes there will be some regulations or some changes in the statute, and then they find new loopholes and new ways to get around it. And so we land right back here with, unfortunately, in the wake, students, their families sharing the negative stories and negative experiences that they've had, and we need to do it all over again.
Organizations like yours have spent years calling attention to these risks. The last round did result in statutory reform that ultimately was only implemented about 3 years ago. Really long tail for that process. Why is accreditation rather than enforcement after the fact now such a central focus of groups like yours?
People don't realize the role that accreditation plays for Title 38 or U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs education benefits, even though it's not directly responsive to Title 38, since it is within the Department of Education. It's a major gatekeeping element to ensure that the schools that get into the system to begin with are going to be offering some level of quality. And so even though it's not necessarily directly related to veterans, folks using their GI Bill benefits are definitely looking for some degree of quality. And sadly to say, it really has not been as successful as we would have liked to have seen, which is why we're calling for changes to accreditation and welcome the opportunity. Fortunately, we just see the direction of that conversation going the wrong way, not the right way.
Why do you think it takes so long for these kinds of concerns to surface into formal hearings or sanctions against these universities?
The reality is most students don't realize the lack of quality or lack of value, more importantly, of the credential or degree that they get from a university until so a student, oftentimes a first generation student in the case of veterans and their families, may go through an entire progression of a program and then go look for jobs. And it's at that moment when they're not getting any calls back, they're not getting any responses or calls for interviews, that they realize that the value of their degree, unfortunately, is not all it was cracked up to be. And oftentimes they do their own research at that point and come to realize that they were either scammed or tricked into a degree that just frankly wasn't worth the paper that it's printed on.
I want to pull on something that you said right at the beginning of that response. You talked about first-generation students. The GI Bill really was, even in its initial founding, created to help people get that first generation into university. And it's still such an enabler. But what difficulty does that pose for the families who are trying to navigate this process?
For many individuals that are using education benefits of any type for the first time, perhaps the first to go to school in their family, they don't have the intrinsic cultural knowledge that many others take for granted. For example, they may not be familiar with what accreditation is or the different types of accreditation and why it matters. They may not be familiar with the different types of programs or resources at their disposal and how they can use them, and sometimes in combination. So there's really just a lack of knowledge. And it's unfortunately, it's that asymmetric information environment that schools prey on. They take advantage of the fact that these students are not familiar with the rules and essentially in the system because they've been told their whole life that education is important and good, which we agree with, but they don't know much beyond that. And those schools are the ones that are looking to find students who don't have that information at their fingertips to take advantage of.
I'm speaking with Will Hubbard. He's Vice President for Veterans and Military Policy at Veterans Education Success. Well, with that background, talk to me about what concerns you now about how the Department of Education is conducting its accreditation reviews today.
Unfortunately, it seems the department is more focused on culture war type topics versus pulling up their sleeves and getting the real work of accreditation reform done. The reality is culture wars, it affects such a small percentage of the population, and not an unimportant percentage, but that's not how you're going to fix the system, by addressing issues related to these topics. So we just really would like to see accreditation actually focus on real standards and real outcomes, more so than having these strange culture war competitions. And the department's approach largely to this issue has been to focus on adding more accreditors. And the reality is that it doesn't matter if there's 5 accreditors or 5,000 accreditors. It's the standards that ultimately are what's important.
Is the Department of Education taking in voices like Veterans Education Success as they're considering accreditation?
We brought 2 student veterans to town recently and have more coming. One was a veteran themselves and one was a military spouse. And they tried to speak at the Department of Education proceedings in the first round of negotiations on the rulemaking, and they were denied the opportunity to speak, which is atypical. Normally, what the department allows at the end of each day is a public comment period so that anybody following the proceedings and any member of the public can share their particular perspective or voice on the issue. And that was something they were denied. So we were incredibly, disappointed to see that, but it wasn't quite a surprise that this department is continuing to not allow for a wide variety of voices in the conversation.
While these hearings are unfolding, veterans and military spouses and children are still choosing schools and spending benefits that they can't get back. So what does all of this uncertainty mean for folks who are trying to rebuild their careers and families right now using GI Bill benefits?
You highlight a critical point, which is if an individual uses their GI Bill and find themselves in a situation where they realize it was a scam operation, or it was a very low quality experience and the marketplace is not reacting to their degree or credential, there's nothing for them to do except try to move on with their life. There's no way for them to get their benefits back. Unlike traditional students that may be using a Department of Education money or grants or loans, there are processes for them to get them restored. If, for example, courts find that it was fraudulent, so they can get their benefits back. But veterans and their family members are actually the only ones that are left out of that equation, because right now there's no statutory authority for the Department of Veterans Affairs to actually give those GI Bill benefits back. And that's something we're working very hard to change.
Will, walk us through a couple of examples of what this feels like from someone who's in the middle of it. You say you brought those 2 folks in to speak in the hearings. What was their experience like?
It's incredible to see these individuals who've had such difficult experiences with higher education, to see them advocate to legislators and their staff on Capitol Hill and in various departments and agencies. And there's such pain, but also passion to make it different, because they know that they're speaking on not only their behalf, but also their family, their friends, colleagues they've worked with, and frankly, everybody else that's coming behind them. So it's powerful to watch, but it's difficult to see it and understand that the system right now is not recognizing these concerns as valid. And that's something that we're working very hard to affect in a positive way. And we're always grateful for students who are willing to speak up, because that's how you get it done.
From the advocacy community's perspective, like yours, what kind of changes would you hope might be put in place to prevent the challenges we've just been discussing? There's
a number of very common sense changes that need to happen on the front end. For example, if a school is about to go out of business and collapse suddenly, there's nothing stopping that from being the case for GI Bill benefits purposes. Or if a individual is teaching a class under Title 38 benefits, there's no requirement that they have any expertise whatsoever in the material that they're teaching. You can quite literally pluck a person off the street and have them teach advanced physics, and there's nothing saying that that's not a problem under Title 38 right now. So there's a number of very common sense changes we'd like to see, and that's, we call that program approval standards. For a program or a school to be approved in the first place for GI Bill eligibility, they should meet very basic criteria. And there are, frankly, very minimal standards at present, so that's something that we would like to affect.
Well, here's hoping that it doesn't take as long this time to get the changes put in place.
I'm with you on that. I think really what it comes down to is anybody who's willing to speak up about their experience and raise their voice about the importance of having these changes, we certainly welcome that. And anybody who's looking for an attorney to speak with, our staff does that full time, totally for free. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure veterans get the most out of their higher education benefits that they've earned as they can.
I've been speaking with Will Hubbard. He's Vice President for Veterans and Military Policy at Veterans Education Success. Will, thanks so much for joining me, and thanks for bringing this issue to our attention.
Thanks, Terry. We appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. In honor of Public Service Recognition Week and Military Appreciation Month, Federal News Network and Delta Dental invite you to recognize the people who make public service possible. Send them an e-card to say thank you at federalnewsnetwork.com. Search May We Say Thank You. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Up next, the top national headlines from ABC News and the Federal Newscast. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up-close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying I need to be a great leader and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done. And you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves. And that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances in understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose: a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable, given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question: who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all. Somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.